Martin Popoff here. Welcome back again to another episode of the Contrarians, where our motto is the wrong album guaranteed every time, or something like that. But no, the idea of this show is that we've got a little team of three of us, maybe four of us in the future. We've essentially come up with this idea that we are going to talk about when a favorite album by an artist is our favorite album, but it's a contrarian choice. So that's the whole idea behind the Contrarians. I know a lot of you have been watching for a long time, but it bears repeating. So there's a lot of bands we can't do, and we've actually talked about possibly doing a few special episodes along the way, and one would be bands that you won't see on the Contrarians. And why? Because the main reason is that they're not the contrarian choice. One of these that comes to mind immediately is Aerosmith. Probably I feel Rocks is their best album, and I think among the team, nobody's going to be able to make a convincing argument for a truly odd choice when it comes to Aerosmith. So yeah, I thought that would be an interesting show to do, but I wanted to mention that as a lead into this show. So this is going to be one of these solo shows. We kind of like this idea of being able to just, when the inspiration strikes us, to be able to do one of these solo shows, and it's not going to be a regular thing. We will do solo shows. We will still do the duo shows. We will still do the feedback shows. We're still going to do the worst album shows. And, on that note, I want to thank everybody for really having our numbers go up pretty dramatically recently. We've been doing this quite a while, and the numbers have just been kind of gradually going up, but we had a nice jump recently, so want to thank you for that. That's for sure. But yes, this is an interesting one because it was suggested by one of our fine viewers. I'm not sure who that was, but because you go back and you don't know which Facebook it was on, or was it Facebook, or was it Twitter? Did somebody email you? And it takes a long time forensically to figure out some of these things. But somebody had asked, why don't you do an episode on Typo Negative or Sammy Hagar? Typo, yeah, possibly there's some problems with that one. We don't know if anybody has a contrarian choice, but Sammy Hagar I thought was an interesting one because, no one really talks about Sammy's solo catalog much. So I thought, okay, I know for sure what my favorite Sammy Hagar album is, but I can't do a solo episode on Sammy unless it's a contrarian choice. So what I did is, I went to various Facebooks and email and sort of asked people what is your favorite Sammy Hagar album, and the responses came in, lots and lots of votes. It was quite a flood of essentially figuring out the democratically correct answer to that, and I will tell you what the correct answer is, because it was a runaway winner. Here's kind of my tally of how all that went down, but no, the format we have in the show is I tell you a little bit of the history of the band. I tell you my choice for my favorite Sammy Hagar album, and then I tell you what the actual sober choice is, the democratically picked choice, the choice that is the one that is the correct answer, essentially. So Sammy Hagar. Interesting guy. Everybody knows him, of course. Massive success. He came bursting onto the scene with the first Montrose album, considered one of the greatest debut albums of all time, one of the greatest hard rock records of the 70s, 1973. He did another one, Paper Money. There were ego clashes with Ronnie. I did a whole book on Montrose, right? It's called Rock the Nation. It's about Montrose and Gamma combined. So at this point, he leaves Montrose and goes on a solo career. He starts his solo career. Ed Loeffler is in there really early. I actually just finished a Sweet book, and there's a mention between Sweet and Sammy Hagar, and there's some discussion that Sweet's career didn't take off because Ed Loeffler spent more time with Sammy and was building his career, and kind of left Sweet in the lurch when they could have been making it in the late 70s. Anyways, Sammy comes onto the scene. He does 9 on a 10 scale. I remember sitting with Sammy in a hotel room and having him sign my records, and he looked at that and he kind of chuckled and said, this was kind of a piece of crap, this album. That's what he said. But it's got some good heavy songs on it. Second album wasn't quite so heavy. Musical Chairs, not so heavy. Did a live album. But yeah, so he went along. He had a little bit of success as one of these sandwich bands or support bands out on tour. He was building things up. He was a little bit of a I would consider him a little bit of a Bryan Adams, a little bit of a John Mellencamp at that time, but on the heavy side. He was the hard rock version of this Midwest heartland rock sort of sound. You're kind of trying to make hit singles, but you're trying to be heavy at the same time, and there's some variety there. And it's just, it just reminds me of these bands like Michael Stanley Band and Shooting Star, and who else is from that region? Even Kansas, when they went a little bit mainstreamy, and Steve Walsh's band, Streets, right? But yeah, like a heavier version of Bryan Adams or John Mellencamp, definitely not as good a writer. You would never put him in the camp of like a Bruce Springsteen or a Graham Parker, but a little bit of striving for that, I imagine. So he had a little bit of success in the late 70s. Moving on, he had even more success. He was doing quite well with records like Standing Hampton and Three Lock Box. This is sort of his peak. Then suddenly he gets in Van Halen and even has a solo album coming out there that does pretty well. Well, before that, there's VOA, but this, I Never Said Goodbye, or self-titled, kind of a weird story, but he has some success with that record. But he's in Van Halen for a bunch of years and has massive success. And then he has, almost in parallel, but then taking off, he has more of a solo career. Starts with Marching to Mars, Red Voodoo. 1013 is a pretty good one from that era. Actually, that is the one. Well, I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But he goes along and he becomes, suddenly he has this idea, I'm going to be the Jimmy Buffett of hard rock, right? So he has the Wobble-Ritas, with Mona and Vic and Mikey's up there, Michael Anthony's playing with him, and he's just like the party guy, right? He's got a tequila brand. He starts this tequila brand. He's pushing this tequila brand. He sells the tequila brand, and he makes something like, he sells it, his share is something like $80 million or something. And he jokes that I made more money on this tequila thing than I ever made making music, kind of thing. And it's true, that's how you make money. You build a business and you sell it, right? But yeah, massive success financially, creatively, although I'm going to argue a little bit in this episode that creatively, I don't know if Sammy is particularly, turn off my speaker there, I don't know if he's particularly the greatest writer of all time, and I've always felt that through time, although I love the guy to death. But yeah, I'm gonna grouse a little in this episode, a little bit about that. But so along the way, well, and on that tack, I want to say that a lot of his solo albums later in life, and even the earlier ones, it is very frustrating that I really don't like more songs than I should like, or I would like to like on them. But he's made lots of solo albums in lots of different ways. There was that one that was much more acoustic. There's ones with guest stars. There's ones where he's trying to be fairly heavy. There's live albums. He's always playing Montrose and Van Halen songs live, which is cool too. And he turns that whole Wobble-Ritas thing into an amazing party, right? So big, huge, varied career. Sorry, big, huge career. Lots and lots and lots of solo albums, and then the legendariness of being in Montrose, and even more legendariness of being in Van Halen. So there you go, and the circle along the way, right? Chickenfoot, man, all sorts of things, right? HSAS. Actually, let's start with that. Let's start with a little funny Sammy show and tell of some cool rarities. There's an old promo thing where I think there's some interview talk on that. There's a flat for the one later in the Van Halen years, just a record flat. There's a Standing Hampton promo 12-inch. Let's see, there's another one. Nothing on the back. There's my Danger Zone album, quite like that. There's that early live album. Yeah, there's my Sammy Hagar way back when he wrote on it, right? This is the very first time I ever went and got autographs from anybody, and I didn't know about Sharpies. So I remember this and Bruce Dickinson. I got a couple of things signed just in ballpoint pen. There's a little piece of the heart. 45. There's another promo for VOA, one of them thingies. And another old one. I think that's his third album, right? And yeah, there's the Hagar, Sean Aronson Shreve. This was a pretty cool album, 1984, I believe it is. And this was he had some success with this as well. I've definitely interviewed him and Kenny about this. Maybe even Neil. I asked him a few questions. I should write up the story about that one time at some point. But no, so here's the point where I tell you my favorite Sammy album. And again, I'm only able to do this episode because it's a contrarian choice. It got some votes, but not the most votes, in any respect. Here you go. 1979's Street Machine. I keep forgetting the name of it because everybody thinks of it as Trans Am, right? So that's a different story, because Trans Am and Street Machine are kind of the same thing. And also the similarity between this and Danger Zone and all this red theme stuff. But anyways, yes, Street Machine. And this is another one I've asked Sammy about many times over the years, and I would like to possibly write up the story of this. I don't think I have a whole Sammy book in me at any point, but so Street Machine. What do I like about this record? So this has always been my favorite Sammy album. It was a pretty clear choice, and like I say, it wasn't the one that I was somewhat surprised, but it's not the one that won the poll even nearly as the greatest Sammy Hagar album. What I remember about this album is, 1979 was that weird year where there really wasn't that much heavy stuff out there. So anything heavy, this is pre-new wave of British heavy metal. We were angry young metalheads. So anything heavy was, very appreciated in our world coming up. And remember, so Ted Nugent's kind of going downhill, not so much. Aerosmith's kind of breaking up. Kiss has gone light. Blue Oyster Cult has gone fairly light. There's not a lot of hard rock out there in the world. Montrose has kind of gone away. There's no Deep Purple. We don't know about Ian Gillan really at this point. There's the Japanese album or whatever, but no, didn't know about Ian Gillan in 1979. I don't think as the Gillan band. Riot is coming along with the second album Narita in 79, right? The first album Rock City in 77. There's a few other things we know Rush and Moxie and Triumph and Tease to keep it Canadian. But not a lot of hard rock stuff out there. So we were always following Sammy's career. He's a cool looking dude. He was making hard rock. The live album is pretty heavy. Every album had 3 or 4 pretty heavy tunes on it. So we were grudging Sammy Hagar fans growing up in high school, right? But the great thing about this record, this is when you're starting to just get into cars again. Like I remember, so 1979, I got my license. I was like on the doorstep getting my license at 16 on the dot, right? Eventually bought a really cool little, what they called a baby Mustang back then, which was the 1977 Celica. Got a beautiful kind of like purpley paint job on it. It looked really cool, kind of dark burgundy purple. Love that car. Love driving around. Listen to my Sammy Hagar. Love driving around. Listen to my Sammy Hagar Trans Am, right? So grew up in Trail, BC. We had Spokane, Washington. Creme FM was our FM station. And I swear to God, like why this is my favorite album, I just remember this thing being played on the radio all the time. So Trans Am, there's Sammy in the band looking all Miami Vice, pre-Miami Vice, and there's a Trans Am in the background, right? And Trans Am was one of the coolest cars in the late 70s. Trans Am, Camaro, the Corvettes of the time. And we loved our cars, 16 years old. This is grade 10 I am at this point. And Trans Am was just this great idea of having this hit single about a car. It's always worked in the past. It worked for Sammy. So here he is making this pretty heavy song with this kind of tribal drum beat, and it's being played on Creme FM out of Spokane all the time, as is even more so the single off of this album, which was Plain Jane, which was a little bit poppy, but it had this kind of rousing, epic, inspiring chorus. And it later on it took on a growing poignancy because you know, you felt it was a little bit about this troubled marriage Sammy was in with Betsy. It never really worked out. Betsy actually wrote a lyric on this album, "Wounded in Love," which makes sense. You know, that ended pretty acrimoniously. Um, but but yeah, you know, Plain Jane was this kind of love song, and it kind of made sense, and you dug it, and we dug it. You know, at the time, even though it was a little poppy, but it was nice to see Sammy getting a hit. We were cheering him on. We loved it. But Plain Jane was on the radio all the time. Trans Am was on the radio, and the other super heavy song on this album, "This Planet's on Fire," almost like a proto speed metal song, that was on the radio all the time, and it's called "This Planet's on Fire, Burn in Hell," just like Twisted Sister had one like that, right? Off of Stay Hungry, which in brackets was, what the heck was that song called? Blah blah blah, Burn in Hell. Anyways, yeah, interesting. So that was also played a lot on the radio, and I don't know, man. I'm almost thinking Growing Pains was on the radio. This album was doing well for him. This was really cool. It was a good time. So loved those songs. Loved, you know, this memory of hearing these songs coming out of my radio. You know, all the bands who make these records, you know, one of their favorite magic moments is hearing their own music on the radio. And even as fans, it's really cool when you know you're sharing this music that you like, and it might be a little cultish and heavy. You're sharing it with all the people listening to the radio at the same time, right? But Growing Pains was pretty cool. It kind of had a little ZZ Top Tush feel to it. LaGrange feel to it. Child to Man was a ballad, right? And we had Feels Like Love was heavy and slow. That was pretty cool. We talked about Plain Jane, Never Say Die, to start off side 2. You know, that great title, which we loved because of Black Sabbath. It was kind of like a proggy, dark, bluesy, a little bit ponderous, but kind of a cool, dark song. Not very heavy. You know, Wounded in Love was slow and heavy. Falling in Love, ballad, not the great one. Straight to the Top, not the greatest song. I mean, it's kind of like a rockabilly thing. You know, I did an episode about novelty, and of my History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff podcast, about novelty hits. And I was thinking, do I have enough to do something on rockabilly? And then, you know, I was listening to this song again and realized, hey, that's kind of a rockabilly tune, right? But it wasn't a hit, obviously. But there you go. Always been my favorite Sammy Hagar album. Now, as we always do on this show, whether it's a duo show or a solo show, you know, what is the sober choice? Where am I wrong? Well, I'm wrong because Standing Hampton is the clear winner of the everybody's favorite Sammy Hagar album. Now, this is an interesting time for Sammy. I really like that era too. So you've got Standing Hampton and Three Lock Box feel almost like a pair. And at this point, he's riding a little bit of that similar sort of oeuvre in rock that Billy Squier is. So he's kind of he's a heavy Bryan Adams. He's a heavy Billy Squier, or a similar heaviness to Billy Squier, because Sammy's actually a little heavier at this point. I thought Danger Zone was a fairly rockin' album, and so is Street Machine, obviously. But at this point, he's a little more poppy, and he's doing well. You know, these records, so Standing Hampton went platinum, Three Lock Box went gold, VOA went platinum, and I Never Said Goodbye went gold. And that's, you know, a little bit of the slingshot effect of being, you know, catapulted to the stratosphere with Van Halen. But he came into Van Halen as a pretty known quantity with the string of you know, pretty successful records. Standing Hampton has I'll Fall in Love Again, which again is just straight Midwest rock, right? That big kind of stiff 4/4 beat to it, just kind of marches along. A little bit of electric guitar, you know, guitar with a distortion pedal on it, but a pop song, just kind of arranged semi-heavy. It's got There's Only One Way to Rock, which is you know, one of his heavier tunes. This is one thing I always say about Sammy, that it, you know, is a little bit of a denigration, and he explained to me once why this is. Being a singer guitar player, So he's kind of like the co-guitar player in the solo band, right? But being there with a guitar on all the time and having to play it. Um, he always said that when it, he did fall into this pattern of when you get to the verse that he has to sing, he does what I always call the Sammy Hagar hanging chord syndrome kind of thing. Like he just plays something simple, he sings, and then he goes into his little riff, and then it's like da, and there's only one way to rock it is like that, right? Da, 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 and then he sings, and then it goes back into the riff again, kind of thing. And he does that a lot, and then you start noticing it when you're a Sammy fan and you own all these albums and you play them a lot, right? So that's kind of a funny thing about Sammy. I never really thought he was the greatest lyricist. I never really thought he was the greatest songwriter, except he did have a lot of success with this abstract idea, this platonic ideal of the perfect song. Like he could write a hit song, but it's a hit song that's a little bit Bryan Adams-y, as I say it sometimes, a little housewifey, right? So his hit songs, you could say those are kind of successful, and they do get into your ear, and you do remember them, and you do have fond memories of them. So I'm right along there with everybody else that I at the time, as an angry young metalhead being in the new wave of British heavy metal, I did not like these Sammy Hagar albums, Standing Hampton and Three Lock Box, but I grew to love them more over time, and now I actually honestly play them probably even more than all the old stuff. But it's funny, all the old stuff. Street Machine got the most votes of all the old stuff. The self-titled got a few votes, but practically nothing for 9 on a 10 scale or Musical Chairs, or really Danger Zone didn't get a lot of votes either. But it was Standing Hampton and Three Lock Box were really strong. VOA got a lot of votes too. I believe that's 1984-ish, right? And so it was right in that nascent era of hair metal, and he was doing that, and he was doing it well. He's got such a great voice, right? He comes to a band with loads of personality, but it's from the voice, and it's from the idea of being an everyman songwriter, good or bad, whatever that is, right? He's no genius, right? He's not a genius writing music, and he's not a genius writing lyrics, right? But he comes with that level of personality. He's just a super nice guy. He is an everyman. He's a really cool dude that way. He had a hard life coming up. He appreciates everything he's got. So he's a really cool guy that way. Marching to Mars got a lot of votes. I remember our fond memory of that. We were running Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles at the time, and we got to go hang out on this rooftop patio, and we're all sitting there, all the press and everything, all at their tables drinking and stuff. And here's Sammy and his new wife. I think her name's Carrie, right? Anyways, they come around to our table, and they're meeting us and shaking our hands and saying hi. We're looking at each other. Is this right? Is Sammy and his wife coming around to our table to meet us? This is pretty cool, right? But yeah, and then later, I think it was that night, he played like a small club gig at I think it was the Horseshoe or Rivoli. And it was one of those restaurants on Queen Street that we were at. But that was cool to see Sammy in a very small club environment. You're just right up there close, and seeing that vocal magnificence out of the guy. He's just such a great singer and a great frontman, right? But so that was Marching to Mars era, and I really did not like the album very much. Just the way he writes sometimes just rubs me the wrong way. There's a lot of things he does that I'm just not a big fan of. But the one besides Marching to Mars in the modern era that got a lot of votes is this bad boy right here, 1013. I really think this is a good album. I've always liked this album. To me, this is his try harder album. This is the one where he really put a lot of effort into what he was doing. And the lyrics are good. The music is tough and strong and well recorded. It's not particularly jokey. That's the other thing with Sammy. He can be really lighthearted, and sometimes that does get in the way of making like a really good album. You go, hey, wait a minute, you're making a record here. Save the party for the live record and the live show. Don't do it on your like this whole kind of idea, this whole look, Red Voodoo and the tequila. And isn't this the one with, Mass Tequila? Hate that song. Hate it so much. But yeah, and then you get stuff like this that just doesn't strike a chord, right? I didn't think Chickenfoot were very good songwriters. I don't think Joe Satriani, I don't think those guys make a good band. The Circle, whatever, but but no, this is the other one that I have quite a bit of fondness for. I think this is really almost possibly his most professional album, I would say, from the whole career. Um, so there you go. It really is Standing Hampton that is the record that the fans have voted as the best Sammy Hagar album. But as my contrarian point of view, and it's a true from the heart, because it's never changed, since, for many years, since it and a few others came out or whatever. Street Machine is my favorite Sammy Hagar album, 1979, and again, really because of just the huge fond memories of This Planet's on Fire, Burn in Hell, Trans Am, and Plain Jane, being on the radio all the time, and that record being quite a big hit. So there you go. Let us know what you think. Like I say, I thought this was kind of cool because people don't talk about Sammy's solo career that much. Let us know in the comments. We're all of us here at the Contrarians. We're pretty good commenters. We'll chime in, and probably you'll even see a feedback episode at one point on this, but where we will read your feedback and talk about this stuff a little more. But please go to the comments, and we also have the Facebook page. Join up, subscribe, and we shall see you again next time. Thanks again for listening and watching.